Excellencies, dear friends, I am Zaid Ra'ad Al-Hussein, the president of the International Peace Institute, and on behalf of the Doha Forum, the Stimson Center, and the Global Institute for Strategic Research, I welcome you all warmly to IPI for this session, and it's our final session, the 16th panel we've had this week. And the best is yet to come. So, entitled "Justice in Action: Beyond Promises to Progress," it gives me enormous pleasure to welcome back friends whom I'll introduce shortly. In September 2025, the Doha Forum, the Stimson Center, and the Global Institute for Strategic Research launched the third edition of the Future of International Cooperation report. This year's report focuses on how institutions and the practice of governance operating at a global and regional levels can contribute to more just societies by protecting human rights, fostering inclusion, and leveraging innovation to bridge long-standing divisions. The report places a spotlight on steps undertaken through global and regional collective action to bridge and overcome the stark justice gaps found within and between many countries. It asserts that building a more just and sustainable future requires rethinking governance, protecting human rights, fostering inclusive societies, and leveraging innovation to bridge divisions. This is my sort of report. The report looks at global and regional justice across the three dimensions: political, judicial, socioeconomic, and environmental. And today's discussion will feed into the 2025 Doha Forum, held under the banner of diplomacy, dialogue, and diversity. I would like now to welcome to the podium His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Sheehy, Executive Director of the Global Institute for Strategic Research, for a few opening remarks. Dr. Mohammed, please.
Excellency, Prince Zaid Ra'ad Al-Hussein, President and CEO of the International Peace Institute, esteemed Mr. Mubarak Al-Kawari, Executive Director of the Doha Forum, Dr. Richard Ponzio, Director of the Global Governance on Stimson Center. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of the Future of the International Cooperation Report 2025. From my perspective, justice is not a passive aspiration, but an active imperative. As the report makes clear, without bold and decisive action, the equity and justices we see within and between nations threaten global stability and collective progress. This report is more than a publication. It's a vital tool. It offers concrete and actionable proposals to innovate our global and regional governance structures. It provides leaders and citizens worldwide with a clear course to chart toward a future that is more just and secure for all. With a fresh analytic lens, the report focuses on how we can reform political and legal institutions, bridge socioeconomic divides, and advance environmental justice. Its release is perfectly timed to inform critical upcoming conversations at the World Social Summit in Doha and the Doha Forum 2025, among others. This report is the contribution of our three entities to ensure those discussions are grounded in principle and focus on tangible progress, equipping us all to tackle the root causes of injustice, from corruption and inequality to poverty. As we are launching the report today, we are not simply presenting analysis. We are issuing an invitation to governments, civil society, international institutions, and citizens worldwide to move beyond the comfortable familiarity of current systems toward the uncertain but necessary work of justice in action. We have a distinguished panel of speakers with us today, and I look forward to a rich and insightful session. Thank you all for your participation in this important dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for your opening remarks. I now have the distinct pleasure to invite again an old friend, His Excellency Mubarak Al-Kawari, Executive Director of the Doha Forum, who will also give a short presentation of the report prior to the panel discussion. Your Excellency.
Thank you, Zaid. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, partners, and friends. Welcome to the launch of the Future International Cooperation Report 2025, created with the Stimson Center, Hamad bin Khalifa University, and hosted by the International Peace Institute. This year's theme, Justice in Action, Beyond Promises to Progress, reminds us that justice is essential. Inequality, insecurity, corruption, environment decline are widening the gap. Justice is the base of fair and inclusive societies. For more than 2 decades, Doha Forum has brought together leaders and thinkers under the three values: dialogue, diplomacy, and diversity. We welcome all views, even difficult ones, and always focus on moving forward from words to action. Our main event in Doha is the highlight, but our work continues year-round through panels, partnerships, and reports like today's. This is the 7th annual report with the Stimson Center. In 2019, multipolar governance. In 2021, sustainable system after the pandemic. In 2023, the innovation imperative. On technology, development, and security. This year, we focus on justice, because without action, injustice will weaken stability and progress. The first chapter look at the challenges and opportunities. Reforming global institutions, closing social and economic gaps, advancing environmental justice. The report offers 4 principles and 6 innovations. Highlights include stronger support for the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, expanding rights at the United Nations Human Rights Council, creating a UN Climate Change Council. These are practical steps to protect rights, include more people, and act on climate. The report also look at regional governance. Examples include training judges in regional courts, investment fund through development banks, stronger compliances with environmental agreements, regional action matter if can be faster and more connected to local needs. The report links to the global agenda, like Summit in the Future in New York, Financing for Development Conference in Sevilla, and the upcoming World Social Summit in Doha. These efforts shows how today's ideas connect to tomorrow's global goals. At Doha Forum, our aim is clear: spark discussions, give space for dialogue, and push solutions forward. We hope this report helps turn promises into progress and word into justice. I would like to thank our partners, Stimson Centers, Hamad bin Khalifa Universities, and International Peace Institute for their vision and teamwork. And I really look forward to see the discussion, the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Excellencies and colleagues, and thank you to the panelists for joining us up on the stage. Welcome to Friday of High Level Week. If any of you are tired, you don't show it. It's a great looking audience, and we're happy to be here with you today. My name is Jenna Russo. I'm the Director of Research here at IPI and the head of IPI Center for Peace Operations and Peace Building. And it's my pleasure to get to moderate this discussion today. I also want to give special thanks to our partners, the Doha Forum, Stimson Center, and the Global Institute for Strategic Research. And of course, special thanks to Mr. Al-Kawari for providing such a rich overview of the report. Now we have a chance to hear from our wonderful lineup of speakers. For the sake of time, I will not read their full biographies, but you have access to them in the packet of materials that you were provided. We are pleased to welcome here today Dr. Mohammed Chihi to my right, Executive Director of the Global Institute for Strategic Research. Then we have Professor Amitav Acharya of American University, past president of the International Studies Association, and also author of a beautiful looking new book called The Once and Future World Order. Congratulations, sir. Then on the end, we have Ms. Brenda Mofia, head of the UN Office for Oxfam International. And finally, Dr. Richard Ponzio, the Director of Global Governance, Justice and Security Program for the Stimson Center and co-director of the Global Governance Innovation Network. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here today. I have 2 rounds of questions for our panelists, after which we will open the floor for question and answer. To ensure we have sufficient time for an interactive discussion, I will kindly ask panelists to limit their responses to around 3 minutes each for each round of questions. If I may, Dr. Chihi, I'd like to start with you. As a director of one of the 3 co-sponsoring institutions for the new report, what is your chief takeaway from this year's focus on the theme Justice in Action? And how does it speak to the zeitgeist the world finds itself in today? The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think the essential message from this year's report is both sobering and hopeful. The title summarizes the fundamental challenge of our time. We live in an era rich with declarations, commitments, and noble aspiration, yet desperately poor in significant implementation. We had many summits, signed numerous agreements, and made repeated pledges about human rights, climate action, and sustainable development. Yet here we are facing injustices that threaten not just individual lives, but we are facing injustice that threaten the stability itself. This report argues, and we at GIS firmly believe, that the gap between promise and the progress has become a defining crisis of legitimacy for the international cooperation. Laying the groundwork for translating these promises into actionable and measurable progress. This year's report tries to see how global and regional governance must evolve to deliver justice in all dimensions: political, socioeconomic, and environmental. From GIS's perspective, we see governance challenges through the unique lens of a region that is located at the intersection of established and emerging global powers. The report does an exemplary job at identifying common issues that require global governance responses while supplementing these with relevant regional ones. the series of reports, like my colleague Mr. Mubarak Kawari said, has demonstrated something profound about the nature of global governance challenges. We began 2023 with optimism about humanity capacity for collective action. 2024 moved to recognition that technology requires governance innovation, and arrived at 2025 to the understanding that justice must be organizing principle for both collaboration and innovation. The current zeitgeist is characterized by a sophisticated understanding that technological advancement without justice considerations often amplifies existing inequalities. Citizens worldwide have moved beyond simply demanding better governance to demanding governance that is effective, inclusive, and just. They have learned from experience that promises of shared security and prosperity through technological innovation reinforce when the benefits flow first to those already privileged. The report warns that without bold and decisive action, injustices within and between countries risk undermining global stability and collective progress. This is not exaggeration. It's a statement of observer reality. We see evidence of this destabilization everywhere. Democratic backsliding in established democracy, climate-induced displacement creating new forms of inequality, economic systems generating wealth alongside persistent poverty, and international institutions struggling to maintain legitimacy in the face of complex challenges. Yet the report also offers hope. By providing concrete proposal for innovation, it demonstrates that alternatives exist.
Thank you so much for laying that foundation for us, that it's not just about strong governance, but that which is inclusive and just, or we risk undermining our collective progress. So it will be interesting to come back to some of those concrete innovations that you referenced from the report. But first, please let me turn to Dr. Acharya. Dr. Acharya, the report presents different foundational principles needed to safeguard justice in global and regional governance, including, for example, fairness, transparency, accountability, and inclusion. And perhaps drawing on some of the findings from your new book and past research, which of these principles do you find to be the most significant or among the most significant in terms of facilitating justice in action, including at both the global and regional levels? Over to you.
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you. I'm a late addition to the program. In fact, I learned about it 10 minutes ago, so I'm still thinking about. And also, my new book is not only beautiful to look at, but wonderful to read. Yeah. So anybody, I'll be happy to give you a copy. Okay, so there are two things I want to comment on, and one is the foundational principles. I'll leave it to the second half of my presentation. First, regional action, because this is a subject I've read and researched for a lifetime. So little history is useful. That 80 years ago at the San Francisco conference, the then global South countries, mostly from Latin America, but some from Asia, won a major victory when they put regionalism into the UN Charter, because the United States and some of the Western countries wanted universalism and no regional organization having any legal stance because of the experience of European regional alliances. President Roosevelt was really dead set against it. It was basically countries that we call Global South, and many of them from Latin America, because many African countries are not there, and some from the Middle East, by the way. They said, no, we cannot, we have a tradition of cooperating among ourselves. We cannot just leave everything to the UN. So the compromise, which remains important, is that regionalism has a place. Regional organization can be first points of call for crisis because they are right there. Those days were before internet, before big fast transport planes. So regional organizations go first. And also they would have a role in mediation of conflicts. So this is enshrined. But this point has kind of fallen on the wayside. People have forgotten about it. And it's a great time now to revive it. I have been working on this. I know the UN always have meetings on between how to promote cooperation with regional organizations, but there is less action, partly because we had an overarching world order led by the United States, but also Western powers, and now that world order is unraveling. And we don't want to talk too much about it, but this also gives an opportunity for regional organizations to come up. Let me also remind you that many diplomats who come to the UN have regional background. They are actually been, Francis Deng, whom I still know, very good examples. They worked in the OAU, they worked in Southeast Asia, hopefully probably in the Gulf Cooperation Council before they actually come to the UN. So we are all regional. There is no such thing throughout 5,000 years of history of world order as a purely global world order. All world orders start regionally from the Egyptian, Sumerian, Roman, the Islamic system, India, China. So there is always a historical regional foundation. We know more about our regions, most of us, than about far off places. The global governance is also regional governance, and that was the compromise, that they are complementary. Universalism and regionalism are either or, but they complement each other. So why we do it now? Because so much uncertainty at the global level, but regional action is happening. The Africa-led, not just African Union, but Africa-led, also we have ECOWAS and others. Regional groups are now leading, as we speak, 10 peace operations. It's not inactive, 10 peace operations led by Africans, not by UN appointed commanders. Southeast Asia, ASEAN, which I study very well, is now very active in conflict resolution, conflict management rather, and economic integration. So Shanghai Cooperation Organization became the site for a global dialogue and maybe a power shift. So much regional action is happening, we should recognize it and channel it in a constructive way. Now, second, quickly about principles. I like all the principles, but I think we should do something about it. Here is a very bold, maybe foolhardy proposal. When you look at the UN Charter, I'm a professor, so I teach UN. I don't give the UN Charter to my students. I give them the preamble and the Article 1 and 2. So foundational principles are listed there. And I was having a conversation with Danilo Turk yesterday at a Harvard meeting. You were talking about non-intervention principle. I said, we have new principles. They're not in the UN Charter, in the preamble. So Article 2 talks about non-intervention, sovereign equality, but there is no mention of sustainable development. There is no mention of environmental justice. There is no mention of racial equality. It was taken out after being debated in the UN, the League of Nations. So maybe it's time to have whatever principles we can agree on to amend the UN preamble. Cannot amend the UN Charter. That's going to not happen. But there is a process in place to amend parts of the UN Charter or the entire Charter. And you could actually, less controversially, put these things in the preamble, because that's the first thing people look at. Non-intervention has a far more legitimacy today because it's in the preamble. But racial equality doesn't have that because it's not in the preamble. Environmental justice doesn't have that. So those are norms of 80 years ago. 80 years later, we have new norms. So maybe an action for IPI, Doha Forum, your foundation. I'd be happy to help you with this.
Thank you for that, and for a bit of provocative but also inspiring task for us maybe in the year ahead. Thank you for that, and would love to come back to that more. In the meantime, Brenda, I'd like to turn to you next if I can. The report we're discussing today argues that without bold and decisive action, acute injustices within and between countries risk undermining global stability and collective progress. Could you expand on this assertion and the extent to which it corresponds with Oxfam's work on global inequality? And specifically, what do you see as some of the chief underlying causes or structural factors contributing to injustice today? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jenna. I'm very glad to be here. The words that came out in your questions are bold and decisive action. Are two words that have been looking at the whole of this week in assessing the statements that have come from our leader, bold and actionable decisions. I haven't seen much coming out in terms of actioning, but however, there's been quite a lot of boldness coming out. One of my favorite statements has come from the Namibian president, Netumbo Nandi. I think I would encourage everyone to look at that, but I have 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So I'm representing Oxfam. Oxfam traditionally is an organization that was working on humanitarian response, known for many years, older than the United Nations itself. But 11 years ago, Oxfam published its first inequality report. And that inequality report changed not only Oxfam, but also the world. You know, Oxfam, over the last 11 years, has year in, year out published an inequality report to just highlight the issues and the underlying interconnectedness around inequality and how much it actually centers many of the crises that we're experiencing now. We have, over the last 11 years, like I said, managed to connect all the crises that we're experiencing right now within this one big word, inequality. Speaking to 3 issues that have come very strongly out of this report, underlining and understanding that when we talk about inequality, we're actually talking about equality. We're also talking about care. We're also talking about collective well-being, and we're also talking about justice. And all those without separating them is what we're looking at when we talk about inequality. So just to give you an example, this week, there was a report that Oxfam published entitled Unjust Transition, Reclaiming the Energy Future for Climate Colonialism. Looking at how the energy transitioning is so much anchored, as we are speaking right now, within the inequality issues. You know, speaking about the issues around the mining, the extraction that's happening, but also the structures of colonialism and injustice that still are perpetrating, be it gender justice or gender equations, be it economic justice, be it peace and security, but speaking mainly to climate change. Last year, Oxfam also produced a report entitled Vetoing Humanity. And that report looked at how a few powerful countries have hijacked global peace and security, and how it's become a necessity for us to look at the reform of the UN Security Council. Earlier last year, actually this year, we also produced another report entitled Takers Not Makers, The Unjust Poverty and an End Wealth of Colonialism. All these reports that I'm referring to have a lot of figures in terms of what we're looking at within nations and across countries when it comes to inequality. I'm not going to bore you with unpacking all the statistics that have come out, but let me just highlight a few so that we understand what we're dealing with. So the Unjust Poverty report shows that in 2024, last year, the billionaire wealth increased by 2 trillion. Just last year alone, billionaire wealth increased by 2 trillion. And last year created 204 new billionaires. 36% of these billions that were created indicated that it linked to inherited wealth. 36% was inherited wealth. So taking us back to the issues of colonialism and the experiences that we've had. 18% also demonstrated of this wealth that has been created, it's monopolistic power power that has been accumulated in the few. And then 6% is chronism. Chronism has necessitated this. And then when it comes to vetoing humanity, we also were able to demonstrate in that report that over the last decade alone, out of 30 vetoes that have been cast at the UN Security Council, 27 have been around 23 protracted conflicts across the world. So because of the veto, we are not able to address these protracted conflicts. We haven't been able to resolve them. There's also been lots of reports. Another one that came out early this year on Africa that demonstrated that wealth within the continent is also accumulated in 4 individuals. So this is what we're talking about. And because of the inequality, because of the concentration of wealth in very few people, we are witnessing crises. Peace and security, we're witnessing it's contributing to climate crisis and many others. So what are the causes? Quickly, I would say I've already mentioned that I think we need to go back to the basics and look at the structures that have existed for a long time. I think because of the imbalances and the power accumulation in many of the structures, we're able to address this. The second one is the issue of taxation. I think we have to look at taxation. And then also inclusion of citizens and leadership. How much are we including citizens in meaningfully addressing these challenges that we're experiencing, and what kind of leadership do we have? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Richard, I'll turn directly to you now. As the director of the research team for the Future of International Cooperation Report 2025, what do you view as one or two of the most consequential global governance innovations introduced in this year's report? Over to you.
Thank you, Jenna. While we're, of course, celebrating this new report with our partners, the Doha Forum and the Global Institute for Strategic Research, I do want to say at the beginning, highly commend the annual inequality report of Oxfam that was just referred to, and celebrating the new book of Professor Charia. But the idea on the new preamble is an excellent one. In the preamble, there is no mention of environment, population, migration, let alone AI and other new frontier technologies. Clearly, an upgrade is long overdue. We put forward a dozen different proposals in this report on global and regional governance as it relates to advancing and safeguarding global justice. As you would expect, we go deep onto the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the 3 regional human rights courts in Africa, in Latin America, and in Europe. I only have time to give a quick overview of just 2 examples, but I'm hoping to whet your appetite with these so you'll delve into the report after today's kickoff. The need to bolster economic, social, and cultural rights, or ESCRs as they're sometimes known, through the Human Rights Council. How we can innovate that, really important, catching up with the political and civil covenant from the 1970s. We put forward several ideas to address barriers to progress analyzed in the report. For instance, a universal periodic review compliance scorecard could increase transparency and generate peer review on implementation. Procedural decisions of the HRC, the Human Rights Council, could also be subject to qualified majority voting to overcome consensus blocking tactics. Additionally, the Council should encourage ESCRs to be adopted in myriad international agreements. At the same time, of course, bringing it into domestic legislation is the key to advancing human rights in 193 member states. Finally, closer to Human Rights Council engagement with these 3 regional human rights courts I mentioned, but also national human rights bodies is critical, and adequately resourcing these bodies would help to ensure that international commitments lead to greater regional and domestic action. Second example is that we back and help to further define the report's focus on steps towards a UN Climate Change Council coming up at COP30. It was also mentioned by President Lula. He first introduced it at the G20 summit that the Brazilians hosted last November, but then elaborated in his speech earlier this week here at UNGA High Level Week. And he argued that it would function within or alongside the UN Framework Convention on Climate Convention, and support implementation, of course, of the critical Paris Climate Agreement. The in terms of the specific ideas that we tried to weigh in, because they really have been encouraging think tankers to come in and help shape this idea. Of course, we immediately said for accountability and technical expertise and teeing up a real serious agenda, you need to have a standing secretariat to assist and coordinate decision-making. Equally important, we recommend a new just transition and review response tool. So this would track progress on climate pledges and recommend corrective actions, potentially encouraging a race to the top among major emitters. This would help to push forward the famous nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, and the global stocktake process that's underway. A few other ideas I'll save for the discussion, please.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to round 2, and I'm going to be extremely strict this time on the 2 to 3 minutes, because I do want to make sure we have a chance to come to our audience for questions. So actually, Richard, I'm going to turn right back to you first. And in the second round of questions, I'd like to ask the panelists to also give special attention to some thoughts that can feed into the upcoming World Social Summit in Doha this November, and perhaps also building off of last year's Summit of the Future and the International Conference on Financing for Development held this July. So Richard, back to you. And first, let me emphasize, one of the great things about this report, if you haven't looked at it, is that it does have a lot of very specific ideas in it. So I do encourage you to look at it so you can get more in the weeds on some of the things that Richard was mentioning. But Richard, elaborating a bit on the presentation we had from Mr. Al-Kawari earlier on the overview of the report, in what concrete ways does the report aspire to shape the current international diplomatic calendar, including the upcoming World Social Summit?
Great. So Chapter 4 actually goes into great detail about what the recent summits, Summit of the Future a year ago, the FFD4, the financing in Seville, mean for the World Social Summit coming up 4th, 5th, and 6th of November in Doha. And I won't then use my first part of my answer, but I'll jump right to 2 specific examples that are connective tissue. It's actually another process separate from all this, but it came up by Brenda and others. The tax convention. Negotiations started, I believe, about a year and a half ago. It's been talked about forever. It should be finished in 2027, but we go into specific ideas on finalizing this absolutely critical body. It's at the heart of what the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, now succeeded by the Seville Action Agenda from this past summer on financing, but domestic revenue generation and avoiding a race to the top, dealing with illicit financial flows in multinational corporations, because we know that developing countries continue to struggle in mobilizing sufficient tax revenue, owing in part to border tax abuse, which is contributing to nearly 500 billion annually being taken out of countries, out of which the 72% of the tax losses are occurring due to multinational corporation profit shifting. I think it was also referred to by Brenda. To finalize a strong UN tax convention consistent with the upcoming World Social Summit outcomes, and to prevent its oversight from being rendered toothless, binding provisions, including a binding dispute settlement mechanism, are essential alongside transparent public reporting to ensure accountability. And rather than falling back in negotiations to the all too common global South versus global North narrative, the convention should be framed as a collective opportunity to redefine fiscal sovereignty, reduce polarization, and increase partnerships for all countries. Second and final proposal that we go in, and it's linked to this Chapter 3, all about regional governance innovations, pooled regional investment funds through regional development banks. Persistent debt problems and limited access to affordable finance remain major structural obstacles to achieving sustainable development in many developing countries. At the FFD4 conference in Seville earlier this year, emphasis was placed on strengthening regional financial institutions. The political declaration of the World Social Summit similarly stresses that ensuring equitable, sustainable financing for social protection and poverty eradications program is key to these 3 goals of reducing inequality, fostering inclusion, and promoting sustainable economy for all. Final point about regional development banks. They can promote investment in underfunded areas such as the informal economy, localized agricultural change, and social services. Unlike loans or grants, these funds offer equity investment to social enterprises, cooperatives, and communities, supporting women-led informal cooperatives, indigenous peoples, and youth-led green startups. Their further encouragement through the World Social Summit, it's not even about a new idea, it's about going to scale, greater scale as a result of the Social Summit in Doha. This would enable fair concessional financing, more responsive development cooperation, for example, using new social metrics like gender pay equity, as well as inclusion through greater community ownership. So very much looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Richard. Dr. Acharya, I'd like to turn to you next, if I can. We're all aware of the United States' recent dismantling of its Agency for International Development and pulling out of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. And while these are perhaps some of the most acute examples of waning donor interest in foreign development assistance and the financing of international organizations, we're also seeing major EU countries, for example, Germany and France. There have been significant cutbacks in development financing at levels that we haven't seen in 3 decades. Against this challenging backdrop, can the ambitious aims of the World Social Summit, let alone the wider 2030 agenda for sustainable development, be met? Or are we at risk of building false expectations and more unmet promises?
Okay, thank you. So again, 2 points. The first is about, the World Social Summit, but before that, the point about development aid. The cutback from the US and affecting also cutbacks from the European Union, partly because the European Union members are now being forced to raise defense spending, and they have not much money left. I mean, they can't do everything. So I have already flagged this in my other writings. The European Union used to be the largest provider of development aid in the world, not the United States. We can debate this, and that's going to go. So where is the money going to come from? Now, if we get the money, what is it going to be used for? Development aid is controversial. And now there is a very active debate of why ending development aid may be a good thing or reducing it. But cutting financing to international organizations is not a good thing. And but I think the Doha Social Summit should discuss ways of, one, how to provide alternative sources of aid or support, both to people, societies, countries, but also to international organizations. That will be a very specific, innovative agenda from other countries, from wealthier countries, from also foundations and the like. But secondly, how to reduce dependence on development aid generally. I'm not a conservative or anything, but I can see that that debate has to be paid attention, that development aid has also done some harm and not good. The second point, the second large point I would like to make is about the modus operandi. I don't know much about what is your operating procedure in the Doha Social Summit. But I think what we need is concrete data based on a scientific consensus. It should be something like the Paris Agreement, where you bring in governments, experts, and the intergovernmental panel on climate change, which is actually very non-governmental. It's actually based on expertise. An institution that's of experts that provides specific, believable data. When we talk about climate change and this impact, we often draw on this panel of scientists who produce this data every so many years. So if you want to have a concrete way of making an intervention in the debate, social summit is too broad, too abstract, too vague. But an intergovernmental panel, or I would say a non-governmental panel on social issues that produces data on consensus, scientific consensus, and also action items will be a good legacy, good impact outcome of this Doha Summit.
Thank you so much for that. And I'd like to pick up on one of the points that you mentioned as I turn to Brenda, which is the military spending. As we are aware, there was a recent report of the Secretary General on rebalancing world military spending for a sustainable and peaceful future. And at the same time, we know when we speak to some of our member state colleagues, they feel that increased military spending is necessary, even at the expense of development, to address their existential security concerns. How do we balance that? What is the message we have for those member states to both address their legitimate security concerns in some cases, while also knowing the drastic shortcomings of pursuing militarized approaches? Brenda, over to you.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to the case that I tried to make on inequality as the basis of all our problems, and just emphasize that the need to address inequality is the imperative. We need to address inequality in order to, if inequality, global inequality were to be reduced by certain recommendations that we've made in addressing wealth, concentration in few people, in addressing the issues around taxation that we raised, but most fundamentally also looking at the institutions and the need to reform the institutions, be it the IFIs, the peace and security structures, and so on and so forth. It is because of the inequality that we are having increased insecurity. As long as we don't address inequality, then we continue experiencing what we are experiencing, be it in Gaza, be it in Ukraine and in many other places. I mentioned 23 countries. That's just on peace and security issues. We haven't even started talking about the poverty elements and what comes, the threats that come from poverty, that comes from climate change. So it's inequality. That said, to answer your question, once you address inequality, then one of the things that we anticipate to see is the strengthening of the state. It's the strengthening of social service provision in countries. And as long as those things are not done, then we'll continue having the threats. And as a result, and unfortunately, as the report has indicated, but also very, very, very good that the Secretary General actually demanded that that report is done, because we've seen over the years reduced investment in social issues, and because of the threats, an increase in military expenditure and in military budgeting. So it's kind of a vicious circle. Like, we need to address inequality, and we need to call out and raise these issues. Will the world be safer, or will the countries be safer by increasing military expenditure? I don't think so. So I think it really is a social question. What I like most about this report is how we've connected the processes, because we need to connect the processes. How we've recommended in this report that when we're talking about the World Social Summit, we're not reinventing anything, but rather we're looking at the crises and the issues and the social questions that have emerged through all these reports. But quickly, I know I'm talking too much, 3 minutes. I wanted to respond quickly to what the professor raised, the issue of the charter reform. I know that realistically and practically, a lot of analysts have indicated that we need to look at the preamble or to do a soft review of the charter. With Oxfam, we feel the charter has to be reviewed. The charter is outdated. The charter is a source of so many of the challenges that we're having right now, because it's the charter that has provided an equal powers in certain countries that is, over the years, because we haven't been able to address the charter, the UN has found itself in a situation where it has many bandages, created institutions, created processes. And as long as we don't go back to the charter, then I think we'll continue having the crises. How do we do that? I think the time has come for us to look at evoking Article 109 and just going back to the basics and going back to San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And indeed, I think you're right. At a time where military spending has never been higher, we probably are at a moment where fewer and fewer people are actually feeling safe and secure. Dr. Chihi, turning finally to you, you are based in the city where the upcoming World Social Summit will take place. What are your hopes and criteria for what could be described as a successful outcome from this November's summit in Doha? Over to you.
Thank you. Hosting the second World Summit for Social Development in Doha represents both an opportunity and a responsibility to our region. The Arab world has often been seen as source of challenges, conflicts, displacement, and extremism. I think this summit allows us to demonstrate leadership in addressing global social challenges while drawing on our cultural and historical resources. Let me be direct about what success looks like for November's Second World Summit for Social Development that will be hosted in Doha. We cannot offer another gathering that produces elegant communique while leaving fundamental structures unchanged. Success must measure not by how eloquently we reaffirm the 10 commitments from Copenhagen, but by how effectively we transform them for our current reality of growing inequalities, demographic shifts, and rapid technological transformation. 30 years later, we face challenges that 1995 summit could not have anticipated. AI-driven job displacement, climate-induced migration, digital divides, and global supply chain weakness exposed by recent crises. The urgency of renewed focus on poverty eradication stems from three critical realizations. First, extreme poverty undermines global stability. Society cannot maintain peace when significant populations lack necessity or hope for improvement. Second, poverty wastes human potential on an astronomical scale. Every person trapped in extreme poverty represents unrealized contributions to human knowledge, innovation, and progress. Third, in our interconnected world, poverty affects prosperity everywhere through migration pressures, security threats, and reduced market potential. The focus on full and productive employment and decent work for all takes on new urgency in current technological moment. The fourth industrial revolution is fundamentally reshaping work, creating both opportunities and threats to traditional employment models. The concept of decent work must evolve to include new realities. Workers who lack traditional benefits, remote workers who labor across national boundaries, and workers whose roles are augmented or threatened by AI. The summit must address these technological disruptions, not as a distant future concern, but as current realities affecting billions of workers. Social integration is not about erasing differences or imposing uniformity. Rather, it's about creating society where diversity is a source of strength rather than division, where all members have participated in collective success, and where differences are mediated through institutions rather than violence. The urgency of focusing on social integration comes from observing global trends, rising populism, increasing polarizations, growing intergenerational tensions, and the weaponization of identity differences for political gain. Without renewed attention to social integration, other development goals become impossible to achieve.
Thank you so much for that and for emphasizing the urgency of social integration in the face of increasing isolationism and nationalism, as he said. Now I have the opportunity to open the floor. I'm going to try and take one round of questions from those in the room, and then I also have a number of questions that have already come in from the online space. I will have to ask folks to come up to the podium, and maybe we can get one of our IPI colleagues to move the podium out for us. Thank you. Because the scramblers from the UN will not allow our remote mics to work. So you will have to come up to the podium, and we would ask you to introduce yourselves briefly. Yes, right here. Thank you. And if you can just press the button. Yes, thank you.
Hello, my name is Fedra Fateh. I'm an Iranian-American attorney. There can be no justice without addressing the ongoing underrepresentation of women in leadership. The UN is a symbolic institution, and yet although all women are taxed from the government contributions, for 80 years, we've only had 9 male secretary generals. So I think even at that very symbolic level, that's something that the institutions that are gathered here today can address. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to take a few if I can, and then we will, oh, okay, go ahead, and then I'll come over to you.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Jose Garcia. I'm from Lean In NYC, which is a women's empowerment network. My question regarding this topic is, the challenge with justice is that it often goes against people in power. They take the human trafficking use case, right? It often endorsed silently. How do we encourage those at the top to really embrace justice without fear of losing it all? Because they often treat it as a zero-sum game.
Thank you for that. And here, yes.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Zaid, for hosting us. I was here yesterday in the same place, but also connecting the dots between the discussion we had yesterday. I didn't attend the 16 events that you organized, but at least 2 of them. Jérôme Bellion-Jourdan, Institute for Global Negotiation. I come from the world of diplomacy, and that's how I got to know Zaid when I was a diplomat for the European Union. Thank you very much for the excellent presentations, for the report. I haven't had the time to go through it in details. But I found it very interesting as a way to outline the structural causes of why is it that we are where we are today. Also to outline where is it that we could go. But what I think, and I would like to get your views on that, where may need more emphasis is how we get there. And coming from the world of negotiation, I would say that much more ought to be done on the how we negotiate, at the global level, but also within societies. Negotiation is exactly about all the issues that we've seen in this report, how to bring together, people, institutions having competing views, worldviews, interests, and I think much more ought to be done in that respect on the know-how of negotiation. We have this initiative, Global Negotiation Support, which is precisely to provide support to chairs, facilitators, negotiating bodies, and I happen to be advising in the, and I know it's mentioned in the report, the Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee on Plastic Pollution, where we had a huge expectation that there would be a success in Geneva, and yet we had a failure. And, a couple of days ago, I addressed a high-level meeting with ministers, asking what is it that we can do better in terms of process, in terms of negotiation modalities, in terms of how we move away from what is often the kind of positional bargaining, the win-lose, the red lines, to saying, can we listen? And I like very much what the executive director of the Doha Forum said at the opening. Listen to difficult views, listening to the views of others, to really understand where is it that they come from, and to realize that, in fact, we can get to a better outcome. So I think, maybe moving forward, there might be a bit of a need also to do a bit more to look into the how we negotiate at global levels, regional levels, societal level, to get to forging the common ground for agreements, but also for the implementation phase. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think if it's okay, I'll start at the end and we'll work our way down. I invite the panelists to respond to maybe 1 or 2 of the things that they heard that stood out to them. So Dr. Acharya, can we start with you?
Thank you. Very quickly, representation of women at the highest level, including Secretary General. I think this is absolutely unacceptable that we haven't had a woman secretary general. I have read the history of the United Nations negotiations. 22 volumes of the San Francisco Conference are online, are searchable. You can look at the names, and you can look at the issues of gender, also race and colonialism, barely mentioned. But some women played a fantastic role. For example, the Indian delegate Hansa Mehta was the reason why we have all human beings are created equal and not all men are created equal. So I strongly support that. How you get around that is not my problem, but I think we can certainly have pressure from the civil society. But I think I'll stop there. There are other questions, probably others are more qualified to answer.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll try to answer about how to make together governments to address some issues. I think it's necessary to go through small groups, and we saw with the Qatar for the mediation, the success of Qatar, because there is one team that they have targets, they have their goals, and they are aware about the problem. When we have a lot of governments together, it's very, very hard. And my opinion is better to go through this kind of new behavior. This will not go through the United Nations all. For example, I was joking before this meeting to say that we don't need the reform of the United Nations. We have an easy way. It's to avoid to go through the Security Council. United Nations without Security Council can succeed. Really, we can have success without Security Council, because the Security Council cannot really give solutions. So it's a joke. I know that is not. we cannot go through this, but we can really try to take the example of Qatar and really to build on this success for this how to make people to come together and how to get success.
So far, we have some provocative outcomes in that we're going to rewrite the charter and eliminate the Security Council. So, Richard, over to you.
Thank you to all the questions. IPI, of course, hosted an event on the Secretary General race that's just beginning to heat up. And I would only add, as a question, the first question was very much oriented around, it's long overdue that we had our first female Secretary General. Let's learn the lessons from 2016 when we had, I think, a dozen really outstanding female candidates. Only one, Irina Bokova, the former, at the time, Director General of UNESCO, broke into the top three in the six different rounds of voting. We need to analyze that and understand why, when, especially from her region, Eastern Europe, there were so many talented candidates. Did they cancel each other out? A consolidation is what I would advise by the second or third round around a leading female candidate, so that that long overdue step occurs. On the theories of not theories, but tactics and strategies around multilateral negotiation, I hope that besides the nature of the question about processes like these three summits that we've been analyzing in this year's report, we're equally engaged about the follow-through, the coordination, the monitoring, something I didn't get to that I wanted to share, that there's always spoilers and bottlenecks to progress and implementation, that well-designed coordination mechanisms and robust monitoring and evaluation are essential for effective follow-through. And so Chapter 4, again, gets into those brass tacks issues. But finally, Article 109, I'm glad it came up because it was relaunched this week in two different events through the Article 109 Coalition, which Oxfam and our Global Governance Innovation Network are supportive of. It potentially, in my view, could come off the back of the final formal stage of implementing the Summit of the Future, the Pact for the Future, which we go into detail by September 2028 when there's a high-level meeting with an eye to 2030. That's going to be the post-2030 development SDGs, what comes after the SDGs. And at the same time, we could finally demystify changes to the charter, which the framers and President Truman and others who launched the new charter in 1945 spoke very directly. It's an imperfect document the moment that the ink was drying on the document that they had just signed. So let's keep that in mind and let's be pragmatic and build a UN for the next phase of humanity. Thank you.
Brenda, I'd like to ask you if you can come in maybe specifically also on the question about justice. You have me sold on the need for addressing inequalities. How do we get world leaders and those actually making the decisions to embrace that imperative? And I think that also goes to one of the questions we had about how do we get world leaders to embrace justice and not see it as a zero-sum game in which they are then denying their own power. And if I may, I'm going to also overlap this with one of our online questions because I think it's related. It asks about how we deal with the fact that around the world there is a trend of rapidly growing violent government oppression against their own citizens. So again, we have this inequality of power within countries and governments wielding power in order to oppress rather than to bring about equality. So what is the path to bringing leaders on board with this imperative that you talked about?
I feel compelled to respond
Yes,
without ignoring your question, to respond to the issue of the female UNSG. I think, like Richard has said, it's long overdue. We really need the next SG to be female. And we have great examples. The only reason why the African Union has an agenda that's clear, Agenda 2063, is because it was led by a woman. That's an agenda that was put in place by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma when she was the AU Commission chairperson. So we can even draw to that success and insist that perhaps all these challenges that the UN is experiencing does need feminist leadership. That said, I also want to just quickly touch on the issue of negotiation. That was the question on negotiation that came up. This week, somebody reminded us that no one deserves anything. There's nothing like you deserve anything, but rather you get what you negotiate. I think, and you can see in many processes that this has been the case at the UN. The challenge, though, is that when meaningful negotiation has to happen, it has to be among equals. If you're not equals, then it's a waste of time negotiating. And I think that's what we've seen. We've seen the IGN running since 2008 until now. Nothing has come up, regardless of all the negotiations that have been put forward, the recommendations and so on and so forth. Nothing has been coming out. And even a lot of successes in several other processes. You come up with incredible documents adopted, but then because of this inequality, then you just have one country because of the power that they have, and then they come and then just undo all the negotiations that have happened. So that said, I think we really need to be bold enough to interrogate the structural issues and the powers. And it's not a question of capacity. I think it's a question of just the uneven structures that exist. We talked about the inequality in and between countries, and I think that's what you're raising, the issue of injustice and what's happening in country with regards to the justice question, but also with regards to the prosecution and civic space that's happening. It's also a question of power and the injustice that's happening in several of our countries. And both in country and outside, I think another challenge that I also hope will be somehow dealt with during the World Social Forum is the issue of accountability and impunity. Because even within many of the countries, there are laws and rules and everything, but it's the injustice is mainly coming from spaces where because there's impunity and there's lack of accountability. I think that's how I can respond to this. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to sneak in one last question, and maybe we won't go to every panelist, but whoever feels like they can answer this well. The International Cooperation Report mentioned the need for closing technological gaps and innovations both within and between countries. How could this be strengthened by regional involvement and support of development in AI? So any panelist who could speak specifically to closing technological gaps within and between countries. Yes, please.
I will answer very generally, and that we don't know all the facts. I mean, that's so it also relates to the question about negotiations. Negotiating for what? Not outcome or establishing what the problem is. And there's so much fake news and distorted news or unscientific news that we need to really, on technology is actually a key part of this, but so is indicators of inequality and all. So I think the AI discourse is very controversial, very early, but I think that should be also part of what I was talking about, an expert group, intergovernmental or panel on say, people who are actually experts, not politicians. And same for social development. I mean, if you have a standing body talking about establishing what I call acceptable, commonly acceptable facts, then we can take it to negotiation and action.
Any final words, Richard or Dr. Sheehy, before we wrap up?
Sure. Technology governance was actually the thematic focus a year ago when we had our first event here at IPI to launch last year's Future of International Cooperation report. And we cross-referenced that in different sections of this year's report. We've definitely looked through the lens of global development and security. This week, two critical meetings, first in the Security Council earlier in the week, open-ended high-level meeting on AI and security. References, of course, to lethal autonomous weapons. You're following WMDs, it's in the loop, out of the loop, autonomous use of nuclear weapons, frightening stuff. And we know that the global security architecture, in fact, Professor Acharya was referring to that from the very earliest days, how much of a mandate and authority could regional organizations have vis-a-vis the UN collective security system absolutely plays out in the security space. I think the most exciting and where there's been the most movement and cooperation is in the development space. And of course, that's yesterday afternoon's AI governance dialogue, one of the key outcomes from last year's Summit of the Future and the Global Digital Compact, the section on AI issues, that and a scientific panel. And in both cases, there isn't work yet that we're aware of, but we're absolutely advocating the connections between the emphasis on regional and sub-regional organizations in Chapter 3 of the report and global initiatives like the new AI governance dialogue, which is the first time that you get 117 of 193 member states that have nothing to do with AI governance. This is the big gap that the UN is pushing to overcome. The next phase has to be syncing up with regional organizations. I know in the Arab world, in Latin America, they're working on large language models in Arabic, Spanish, overcome this new digital divide that has quickly emerged in the AI space. So something we highly recommend that we look at in this year's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sheehy, any final word from you?
Thank you. I come back to say that really injustice now is a threat for our lives, the global order also. Like you say, it's a threat for this. With this new global order, we need really actions. We need concrete actions to try to undermine this injustice.
Thank you so much. As we wrap up, let me give my final few plugs here. First, absolutely do check out Oxfam's reports. They do really stellar work. Again, Dr. Acharya's new book, which is not only good looking, but also wonderful to read. And Dr. Acharya will be having a book event on October 1st. And if you're interested in checking that out, you can check the Stimson Center website for that. And then, of course, the report that we've been discussing today, I believe there are some hard copies available for those in the room. Otherwise, find it online. A big thanks to our partners, Doha, to Stimson, to the Global Institute for Strategic Research, and to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here.